Welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, where we interview remarkable people and share strategies for mastering money and living a meaningful life. With your host, Grant Sabatier, creator of Millennial Money and author of Financial Freedom, a proven path to all the money you will ever need.
Welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast. In this episode, another solo special episode during the coronavirus pandemic, I'm going to dive into my thoughts around the stock market, emotional well-being, and give an update on what I'm up to during this increasingly uncertain time. So this episode is being recorded on Friday, April 10th, 2020. About 150 miles north of New York City, which as of earlier this week, the state of New York has more coronavirus cases than any other country in the entire world. So over 150,000 people have the coronavirus. There's been over 7,500 deaths. So I'm literally in the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. And I've been under lockdown like most of you and starting to get quite stir crazy. I thought that I was well prepared with a stack of books and working on writing my second book. And, for the past year, after going on the book tour and traveling across the world, I was super exhausted and really wanted some time to rest. And so I've had that opportunity to rest and sleep in, which was great for about the first month of my self quarantine. But I've gotten to the point now where I've started to get a bit antsy and I'm finding it harder to both write and create and remain optimistic about the future, even though rationally I know there's going to be an end to this pandemic at some point in hopefully the near future. I'm surprised that what often is a very deep level of motivation within me to create and seek and connect is diminishing unexpectedly in me. And I wanted to share that because perhaps you're feeling that as well, whether you've been working on a creative project or maybe this is the first time in your life or the first time in a long time that you've had to deal and sit with uncomfortable emotions that are often easier to brush away or run away from, or that are easy to hide when you're busy and chasing the next goal, as I talked about in the previous solo episode. So I wanted to share where I'm at emotionally because you might be feeling a similar way, or it might be how you feel in a couple of weeks. I've been under self quarantine since the end of February, so it's been about 5, almost 6 weeks now, and I didn't expect or couldn't have even imagined feeling how I feel now. And it's one thing in life to feel bored, we all know that feeling, or to feel trapped, but there's this deep level of unconscious, I'd say, melancholy that I feel. And it's not depression, although it might have hints of depression. It's more of it's like the wind that was at my sails has now dissipated, and not only am I feeling emotions that I've never felt, but I can feel that others are too, and that there's this large, obviously systemic shift that's happening consciously and unconsciously in both the United States and really across the world. And I think we've gone beyond this just being a crazy and uncertain time to now we're getting to a point where whether you're out of work or not out of work, just the fact that we don't know when this is going to ease up, even though the data is showing the virus is flattening and the curve is flattening in some cities, and even in New York, the number of hospital admittances is dropping while the deaths are actually increasing. So the data shows that we're getting to the peak or will be near the peak of this pandemic, I think the bigger question for me is, will we be able to get A, out of quarantine, and B, when will that happen, and C, what will that look like? Because we all know that it's not going to just be a simple, hey, now you can do whatever you want type of a situation. So there's going to be a massive, both cultural and personal adjustment that's going to have to happen that none of us know what that looks like. And everyone's pointing to Wuhan as the example of a city that now is getting back to work. But all reports show that most people in Wuhan are taking it slow and remaining in self quarantine. And even though factories are starting to open up, it's by no means business as usual. So we can all agree here, I think, that our world has fundamentally shifted. And this podcast is certainly about money and financial freedom. And, I was very happy 2 days ago. Financial Freedom in Paperback was released. It's now available online on Amazon, at your independent bookstore, hopefully, if they're selling copies online. I wanted to make that brief mention before I forget, but the paperback version does have quite a bit of updated content, a new appendix, a recommended reading list. So if you've read the book or you haven't read the book, you can now go get it for under $12 online or other places that books are sold. So I wanted to make that quick announcement. But the world looks very different than when I started writing Financial Freedom in 2017 and when it even came out last year. I think the principles of saving and investing and ultimately creating a financial platform and cushion on which you can have more options and choices in your life is now more relevant than ever before. Certainly, financial freedom means something different to all of us. But at this time, as I encouraged you in the previous episode to think about your relationship with money, I wanted to re-encourage you to continue to revisit your relationship with money, because a relationship is something that changes over time, and how you feel about money could be different than how you felt last week or last month or last year, and might be different than how you feel about it next month or next year. And so I encourage you, as always, to view money as something to have a relationship with, and realizing that maybe if you are stressed about money right now, that doesn't mean that you'll necessarily or have to be stressed about money in the future. And this is one of the biggest challenges, because whether you have a job or you don't have a job, clearly our economy is going to take quite a bit of time to recover. And I'm not here to project on whether the stock market will go up or down, in the next few months. All I know is that from a social, cultural, and clearly a financial and economic perspective, our world will be fundamentally different as we move out of this pandemic, hopefully sooner rather than later. And the market, it's interesting because the stock market, and most of my investments now are in a total stock market index fund. And over the past couple of weeks, the Dow has increased over 25% after being down considerably. At a time when so many businesses are closed, you might be asking, why is the stock market going up? And I think it's important to note that the stock market is largely based on perception, and it's people rationally and irrationally making decisions around what company stock to buy and what company stock to sell. And of course, there are certainly financial fundamentals, there's earnings, and all of those technical elements of a stock and a business that most stock traders, or some stock traders, certainly evaluate. But at its core, the market is largely based on perception. Do people feel like the economy is getting better? Do they feel that it's getting worse? Do they feel like there's going to be a market opportunity for a certain company or not? Is a company going to thrive? Do you think a company is going to thrive in the future or decline in the future? And of course, all of those things, even when you have the best of data, are tough to predict. So it's important to remember at this moment, it's such an unprecedented event in our stock market's history. Those traditional models of evaluating the strength of the market in a lot of ways, I think, don't apply. So, right now, I'd encourage you to think about investing for the long term and continuing to invest and stick with your strategy like I'm doing moving forward, and then continuing to invest in the stock market in a diversified low cost way like a total stock market index fund, and not focus too much on the ups and the downs and the drama that's shared in the media. And it's interesting because the media clearly makes money on advertising and by getting eyeballs and people to read stories. And during the beginning of this epidemic, you noticed every day there were more dire predictions, there were more stories about people dying. And I've noticed just over the past week that a lot of the stories, for example, on CNN's homepage or even the New York Times homepage, a lot of them are the same stories that were there a week ago. And the sensationalizing of the coronavirus pandemic and the craziness, it seems to have softened a little bit. And so even feeling that in the media, that there's an immense amount of uncertainty around the content that people want to consume. And the reality is that because sports aren't happening and concerts aren't happening and new albums aren't being released, there's not a whole lot of new stuff to talk about from a media perspective in the world. And so you see a lot of rehashing of the same stories everywhere, like you do often. But I think it's entering a crazy time where collectively and consciously we're all stunted. At our core, we're a part of everything that is and has ever been. And in every moment of every day, we're all slowly dying, we're all aging, and this moment collectively and even individually is a moment of death. The you that you were before this, the you that you were even yesterday, is different than the you that you are today. We often try to hold on so tightly to whether it's our job title or our net worth or our investments or a vision of our world that we had, that in a moment like this, which we're fearing for our lives, we're fearing for our friends' lives, we're fearing for the future of our country and our businesses and our friends. This is a moment of the recognition of something that very visibly and collectively is dying. And that doesn't mean that the American economy and small businesses and you and your family won't come out of this stronger than ever. And clearly, we're all in this together. But I think it's important to acknowledge that something has died. That can be emotionally difficult. That, even for me right now, I'm struggling with it on certain days. Clearly, I'm still Grant in the flesh, and I have my beard, and my beard's getting longer, and my hair is starting to gray, and I can see myself visibly aging in the mirror. But I'm no longer that person that I was before this happened. I can feel that this moment and these events have really rocked me to my core, and that I'm becoming a new person. The hard thing, because of what's going on, because we are all in our houses, we're consuming media, we're not out having those new, vibrant, rich experiences, things like traveling and meeting new people and exploring new things and exploring new external stimuli and sensory experiences. We're forced to not only confront the person that we were, but there's less that we can hold on to right now. There's less to look forward to because so many events are being rescheduled or postponed. There's less to engage with in the world. And for me, I'm struggling with that just today, but generally, and I wanted to be open with you about that because you might be feeling a similar way. I'm looking for other ways to naturally define who I am. And certainly I'm Grant, the author of Financial Freedom, and my paperback book just came out yesterday. And I'm getting emails from readers all over the world. And so I still exist. My voice is still rippling through the universe, but being stuck inside and not knowing when this is going to end, I can feel a shattering of my identity, which some moments is exciting because, as I talked about in the last episode, how do you best invest in the you that you've yet to become? And not knowing, in a lot of cases, to me, has been over the past 2 years the most beautiful thing. But at this moment when we're all collectively dying, literally and figuratively, and fear for our lives, and we're losing people we love, and the world that we existed in will no longer exist in the similar way coming out of this pandemic, it's important to meditate and reflect on that and acknowledge it and talk about it. And this is one of the things simply why I wanted to share on this podcast episode. Hopefully, and I hope you have someone to talk to about how you're feeling during this time, and that you connect with others and acknowledge, even if it's an uncomfortable conversation, the struggles and the suffering that we're all going through during this time, because that can be extremely difficult to deal with. And I find challenges dealing with that in my own life. So I know that there are tens of thousands of you listening, and I want you to know that others are listening. And while we're all going through this together, all of our experiences are individual and different. So all I can do is share my own experience with the hope that it helps you or others who are going through something similar too. I'm certainly optimistic about the future and remain optimistic about the future, but this is a really, really tough time. And certainly things like meditation and walks and self-care and taking care of yourself and eating well and all those things that we hear and read about that we should be doing, all those things help and make it easier to cope with. But at its core, this is just getting more challenging for me personally, and probably for some of you as well. And I simply wanted to note that at any moment we're always dying, and that change truly is the only constant in life. And it's those conditions of death and suffering that make new opportunities possible. And so while your business and your life and your relationship with money might look very different when we come out of this, we're in this moment of transition. We're in this moment of change. We're in this moment of becoming. And I read a really incredible book that I just finished yesterday that I wanted to highlight for all of you. It's called In Love with the World, and it's by a Buddhist monk who talks about some of these transitions between life and death and becoming. And it's a really incredible book that is one of the best books that I've read in the past year. So I encourage you to check it out. It's called In Love with the World. It's by Yungay Mingyur Rinpoche. It's a simple book that you can find online. It came out last year. It's called In Love with the World, A Monk's Journey Through the Bardos of Living and Dying. So often in our lives, when we're transitioning from one phase to another, we're moving so fast that we don't see that transition, and all of a sudden we wake up in a year from now and we're in a radically different place than we were, and we don't quite know how we got there, and we weren't mindful of those transitions. But this is one of those rare moments, at least in my life, where because we're literally stuck and we truly aren't free from an external perspective, the transition is visible, it's present, it's right in front of us. And so being mindful about that transition, giving yourself permission to feel whatever you're feeling, taking off that need to be productive or create or whatever pressure that you feel, and finding a way to simply exist within what is fundamentally a form of emptiness and uncertainty. I hope that coming out of this will realize that we can't do it on our own, and treasure the world in a slightly different way. And so we can't, of course, underestimate the impact that quarantining has had, for example, on pollution in all of the cities. Los Angeles is now one of the least polluted cities in the world when it tends to be the most polluted. In India, the Himalayas are now visible for the first time in over 30 years. So we can visibly see the impact that we have had on the environment. And right now, I'm looking out the window here in upstate New York at a tree that I've been looking at every day when I've been meditating, and every day it's turning more green. And when I first got here, there were no leaves on the tree, and now it's about half covered with leaves. And so, in every moment of our day, those signs of change and transitioning and a new season are always visible. And maybe we haven't been looking at them as closely as we now see them, and that can create a lot of feelings that maybe we haven't had before, or just make us uncomfortable. And right now, the last few days, I've just been uncomfortable. I was really enjoying the retreat and the resting, but I've felt a little crazy the past couple of days, and just wanted to share that with you, if it's helpful or if it's not, and let you know that that's how I'm feeling. And I'm noticing these transitions, and I'm noticing how I can feel the desires that I had before this are now changing. I really wanted to write the second book and was so motivated and had an outline and was creating all this content. And I've been forced to step back, not only because I don't have the motivation to write, but I'm realizing that the world is going to be fundamentally different than the world that I was writing book two for. And so I'm confronted with, okay, what do I want to say? What do I have to say? What do I need to say? How can I best support anyone who's struggling during this time? And the only way that I know how to do that at this moment is to simply share how I feel and what I'm seeing in the world and what content is helping me. So, and I simply wanted to reach out and thank you for all of the emails and all of the messages that you've sent me during this time. There are certainly a number of things that are rapidly changing in the finance world. The paycheck protection program from the government has been slow to run out, and I think a lot of that money is going to be exhausted very quickly. And so even if you have a small business, that program, I think it's going to still be a huge struggle for those with small businesses. I think the government, certainly while they're trying the best that they can, this is such an unprecedented crisis where it's going to be very difficult for the next 6 to 12 months for small businesses and individuals. And so during this time, not only do I encourage you to do the work that you might have been putting off, but I also encourage you to simply know without knowing and exist within the emptiness and be open to possibilities and the potential of feelings and emotions and maybe even forms of energy that you haven't felt before, because so much is happening that's new for all of us. And that's all I wanted to say today. Continue to evolve your relationship with money. Realize that the only constant in life is change, and that your relationship with money will change, your relationship with the world will change, and certainly your relationship with yourself will change. And don't be afraid to let go of some of those things that maybe you've been holding on to too tightly when it comes to the dreams that you had, or how you've been thinking about your life story and your identity. And I'm not saying any of this is easy. None of it is easy. I'm struggling with a lot of this and thinking about what I want in the future and who I'm becoming, both consciously and unconsciously, through this process. So I'm here. I want you to know that I'm thinking about you and you're in my thoughts, And I'm wishing you peace and ease during this insanely tough and difficult time. If you haven't read Financial Freedom, check out the paperback version. There's a lot of new content in there if you already have read it. And then another quick announcement, the Financial Freedom Summit has been rescheduled to September 29th and 30th, and ticket sales have now been reopened. This isn't a hard sell about going to the summit at all. I've just received quite a few questions about it, so I wanted to let you know that the summit has been rescheduled for September 29th and 30th in Long Beach, California, and you can learn more about that at financialfreedomevents.com. You can check out the paperback version of the book at financialfreedombook.com. And then finally, check out the new millennialmoney.com. I launched the new site earlier this week, and there's a ton of new content, a ton of new features, new calculators, a bunch of cool stuff. So if you are thinking about personal finance and investing and want to dive deep into money, check out the new millennialmoney.com. Hope you have a good day. I'll be back soon and wishing you the best during this time.